Hey everyone, and welcome to another recording of Our Human Experience, the podcast where we probe individuals to share the stories that made them who they are today.
And try to find the connection that is our human experience. And we are recording today in beautiful Babinda at the Arts Nexus podcast studio. I'm Claire Tierney.
And I'm Anna Winter.
So where can they follow us, Anna?
They can follow us on social media at Our Human Experience on Instagram and Facebook.
ourhumanexperience.com.au. We invite you
to pod binge
Our Human Experience
anytime you like. Hey Claire.
Hello, you. How are you?
Me good. You?
Me. You. We were doing our drama warm-ups.
Yeah. Wow, what a week.
I've had a very strange week, actually, but yeah. So all the lower apartments were almost broken into this week. So that was kind of very strange kind of feeling about the place. So it's such a beautiful apartment block and I've never had any problem. But they did the same thing at every apartment and they didn't get into any one of them. So it began with the worst breaking and entering people.
They had no luck.
They were crap.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for
thankfully.
that.
Well, that brings us to our next guest today.
Yeah.
Who also is part of our law enforcement in Queensland.
Yeah.
So welcome, Don MacKay.
Hey, Don.
Hey, thank you, Claire. Thank you, Anna. It's great to see you both. Oh, it's my privilege to be the first person, yeah?
Don, you are the first person of our day, definitely.
Yeah. There you go.
It's an early
Cool.
one.
There you go.
So let me ask you, Don, if we go back to your beginnings, where did you grow up? You know, a little bit of background. Tell us about your local community, your backyard from the age of 0 to 15, and how your formative years shaped the direction you're on.
Yep, cool. Okay, so my mum and dad were doing a lap of Australia, and which back then was a pretty rare sort of thing to do, working around working as they travelled around Australia. I was born in a place called Derby, which is in the far northwest of Western Australia. And then they continued their lap around, got back to Mackay, where my mum grew up and where my mum and dad met. And that's where I spent the first 16, 17 years of my life at a place called Bacasia, which is on the northern beaches of Mackay, which is just a magic part of the world. So, there's places there that are called Sunset Bay and Sunset Boulevard. So you can imagine it's just a pretty picturesque spot. And growing up was amazing. You know, we had all the freedom of being kids out on our pushies. You know, we'd leave home in the morning on our pushies, no helmets back then, ride our push bikes all day, go fishing, spear fishing, just having a ton of fun, exploring, spend a lot of time at the beach, and life was really, really awesome. I had a fantastic childhood, and it was a ton of fun.
Fantastic.
I'm picturing it.
Jealous.
Wow, I've never been in that direction. So, I'm getting a visual. So, in your life today, you know, there's so many people that enter our lives, come and go, and, you know, there's always someone that's a standout. And then sometimes it can be more than one. Who do you feel has passed through your life or is in your life that has, you know, mentored you, motivated you, or made you feel that you know you knew the direction you were going to go, or sort of planted seeds within your mind? Is there someone that stands out, and how, you know, tell us a little bit about sort of where you're at and why you chose the field that you're in initially when you started your career?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, I'll go back to my childhood side of things from a mentoring perspective. Yeah. Look, my parents are both amazing, so excellent mentoring from that side of things. That was incredible. And then I met a guy, was my neighbour, used to live across the road. He's a Torres Strait Islander gentleman by the name of Rowan Tass. And at probably in my early teens, I started doing Taekwondo with him. But it was more than just doing the Taekwondo. It was the mentorship, I guess. He was this mountain of a man, had biceps that were just huge. And, as a young, skinny kid, I used to look at him in awe and just think, you know, he was, he's, from a physical perspective, he was incredible. And I used to go over to his place every Saturday afternoon and we'd do some sparring, and many afternoons I'd go back with a split lip or a blood nose. And I think that was pretty cool, because it just, taught you a few of the realities of life, which was excellent. And I guess as a kid, I also had another experience, which at the time didn't probably impact on me as much as it has in later years. But I was 14 years of age, and as I said, we'd spend a lot of time riding around in a push bikes. And one morning, I got home, and Mum said, "Do you want to go and see your dad? He's around at your uncle's place." And in Bacasia, all the sort of family lived relatively close together. But I always remember this day. It was a winter's morning, and I'm riding along on my pushy, beautiful blue sky. I ride down this cul-de-sac and up off the cul-de-sac into this two-wheel sand driveway. And he had an L-shaped drive. So it would go for about 30 meters, and then it took a sharp right-hand bend up a slight rise to a pad where he had a garage. And anyway, on this particular morning, I'm riding along. I get to the end of the first portion of the driveway, which was all tree lined. And just as I came out from behind the trees, I remember something just flying in front of my eyes, like it was that close that you could nearly touch it, sort of thing. And anyway, as I've turned and I've looked up the driveway, I see my uncle, my dad, my cousin, and another young fella. And initially I didn't know what was going on, but my uncle just started bellowing, at my cousin. And as I got closer, I could see that he was holding a compound bow. And what had happened is they were shooting down the driveway into a target, and my cousin had let go of the arrow without me being in vision, and then I've just rode into the arc of this arrow. Yeah, and it missed my head by about 6 inches. Just flew right in front of my face. And I reflect back on that story often now. Being older, but the fragility of life. That's the reality. 6 inches further forward, and I wouldn't be here. So, and then as a parent, I look at that and go, wow, what would that be like as a dad watching that situation unfold? So that was a pretty, as I said, a pretty important experience for me, because many times over my career, I would see the fragility of life, but I would reflect back to that story, and it can very quickly put you back into perspective and go, you're lucky to be here, so it's an interesting spin on the world. But
it's interesting how we revert to our childhood, Don, and as I feel, as I've aged as a human, we sort of, I believe we go in reverse in many ways, like sure. Knowing you and only for a short period of time, but watching, the way you project yourself, and I can actually envisage a lot of that coming back from the first sort of few sentences you said about your childhood. We all strive to go back into a direction that when we're children, and we have that freedom of less worries, not unfortunately not for everyone, but you said you had a really good solid childhood. So when you say, you were doing martial arts at such a young age, for me, what that calls out, and from what you've just said, it calls out that you at a very young age learnt to be very tough. And that's physically and mentally tough doing a martial art. And how do you feel that those lessons at such a young age, from obviously someone that was very passionate about a martial art, how do you feel that helped you within many aspects of your life? How do you feel that that's sort of, do you reflect on that mentally and take yourself back to those moments when you were first learning and first getting a split lip?
Yeah.
To toughen you up, because life's tough, hey?
Yeah. Look, and to be honest, I'd never really thought about it from that perspective as tough. To be honest, and as a kid, and even today, I don't think of myself as tough. That's just not the lens that I try to portray, or the way I see myself. But I guess the point you make is really relevant, because it does invoke a little bit of that sort of stoic view of the world, which I think is really important. Like I'd get punched in the mouth and go, yep, okay, what can I learn from that? And so that was interesting, that aspect of it. But I do think the discipline that comes from doing something like that, and look, I don't profess to be a martial artist by any stretch of the imagination. I only did it for really, like a 4-year period, which was fantastic. But I guess the discipline side of it was really nice in that, you know, you got exposed to a lot of older men who had, you know, some would be really mean during your training, you know, and
I'm sure.
some more father-like in, you know, the way they would look after you. But others, you know, they didn't care that you're only a kid. They would still, you know, beat the crap out of you. So I guess, you know, that aspect of it and being able to endure those type of situations, yeah, in hindsight has been really helpful, but I haven't really reflected on it much, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we hope to bring out of these conversations about your human experience. I think with what you've said, knowing and the intro that Claire has given on you about, you know, the extensive work that you have done and that you're planning to do in the future is really relevant, because I suppose, you know, they always say, and as you know, being very athletic, that muscle has memory. And then you use that muscle at a very young age, physical muscle and mind muscle. So I think that that's something that is, you know, to learn to punch when you naturally, your instinct is to hug, is in itself using a muscle that we're not used to using in martial arts. And having dabbled in a bit of Muay Thai myself and boxing, for me to learn to punch someone in the face was quite confronting, and it took a long time for me to work through, because I don't really want to punch anyone. So that was a muscle I'd never used before, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's, you know, to do what you've done, and, you know, I can't wait for you to keep telling us all of your journey, but, you know, all these muscles that we're twitching and learnings that we have physically and mentally, they all make us who we are, don't they?
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that whole exercise and movement aspect of life is terribly important. And I had, like I said, my parents were also mentors. I remember my mum at a very, very early age just being driven to exercise, and not that she pushed that on us by any stretch of the imagination, but she just had a view that every day, you know, she needed to move her body in some shape and form. And that was this, you know, I fell into it, I guess. And from that side of it, I think exercise is just critical to our health and well-being, you know, where we were designed to move, you know, from an ancestral perspective, and it just has to be part of our life if we want to have a healthy lifespan.
Agree.
So with the work you do now, Don, and you work at a fairly high level, are you still working with the law enforcement?
Yes, I'm still with the police. So if I just give you a snappy overview of my career, it's probably the best bet. I joined the cops straight out of school as a cadet back then, in 1987. So back then they provided an opportunity for young men. There were no young ladies at that point in time, young men, to go through a cadetship, which was 18 months. You would live in at the academy for the first 12 months, and then the second 6 months you could either stay in or move out. And that was a fantastic experience, you know, as a formative experience, you know, a lot of discipline. You got used to rules, and you became institutionalized. So that was you know, had a massive impact. And from an identity perspective, I was only talking to someone about this yesterday. You know, you identify as a police officer, and it became a massive part of your life. And I think it's only as you get a little bit older that you see the importance of being able to de-identify as you're a police officer, but that's not who you are. That's the role you undertake.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that's a, you know, a really important thing that I learned. But I think early in your career, you don't understand that. You know, you socialize with police, you work with police, you see the whole world through a police lens, and that I don't think is super healthy. I think it's really important to be able to, you know, whatever role you're in, whether you're in, you know, healthcare or you know, any sort of industry, it's not who you are. It's just a role.
You're decompressing with people that are all feeling pretty, you know, emotional, or they're seeing things that, you know, being a police officer, like I can only imagine. I mean, we're seeing what's happening now and the pressures that they're under in this, you know, the last couple of years, you know. So yeah, that whole sticking together, it's like a club, you know. I was in surf clubs myself, you know. We stuck together. Like, it's completely irrelevant, but it's that whole, it's your identity, you know. You know, I identified, and it's identity. So yeah,
I don't think it's a bad thing by any stretch, but it's not all of who you are, is it? And I guess the point you make there is spot on. You know, like, and use nursing, for example. If you're a nurse and the only people that you socialize with or interact with are nurses, you only get that nursing perspective on the world. And I think it is really healthy to to mix with people and identify with people who have a different perspective, so you don't just see everything from that one screen.
I mean, growing up, I mean, the whole thing is, you know, when you're at school, you go to school with certain children. I went to a public school, and my mum's biggest thing growing up, and I'm not sure how many people lived in the community you lived in, but sport for me is how I made my best friends out of school. So
Sure.
the roller skating rink, the netball team, the tennis team, the surf club. And so then you could mix with all different types of children from different walks of life. And that's ultimately, you know, when you first start working, and I'm sure in law enforcement, you got to meet all different types of people and people you might necessarily get along with. But when you're in that team environment, you have to work a way of getting along with each other and working as a team. So that's,
So, Don, just to go back to what you were saying about needing to have that balance, life-work balance, is that something that you're focused on in your career, and how do you work with the law enforcement with what you do in the sorry, I'm just getting the name of your business, and choosing the types of mental mental strength that they need on the front line, and then to try to encourage them to be more socially broad. How do you play that out within your career and your work that you do and work with them?
Yeah, okay, Claire, it's a good question. I didn't finish explaining the aspects of my career, because I think in different parts of it that equation differs greatly. So I come into the academy, I do 4 years in general duties, working in Townsville and Cairns, and life as a young, you know, in my teens and early 20s, you know, it doesn't matter then. You know, work-life balance isn't a thing. You just worked hard and then partied hard and had a ton of fun, and it was all good. When in 1992, I joined the Special Emergency Response Team, which is a tactical team within the Queensland Police Service when it first got stood up. And I had 25 years doing that role. And I moved through the ranks from senior constable through to inspector. And at different levels in that progression, you have different areas of responsibility. So when I moved to Cairns in 2001, as the officer in charge up here at the time, that would be the first of what ended up being a 17-year period where I was continually on call. So that provides a completely different dimension to the work-life balance, because, you know, you're carrying your mobile phone with you all the time. And those calls were important because someone was calling you because they needed the assistance of that team, because it was generally, you know, a high risk for a task that required the specialist skills of the people in that unit. So there, balancing it was very, very challenging. And in fact, at the end of my time there, that was the thing that wore me down to the point where the phone would ring and I would have a stress response. And I had to put my hand up and say, I can't continue to do this any longer. And then I moved across to an area called Forensic Services, and that's like the CSI you see on television, only it's nothing like the CSI you see on television. And you know, the people in CERT are amazing people, super driven group of men who do an exceptional job. And then coming across to Forensic Services, a super motivated and dedicated group of men and women who, in my view, just do the most incredible role. And, you know, look for that evidence in amongst some of the most gruesome scenes that you could imagine and that people should never see. So again, from a work-life balance there, one of my focuses now is really trying to look after them and make sure that they're traveling well and they're healthy. But from a personal perspective, I have the flexibility now in this role where I'm not required to roll out to scenes, where I was in the past. So work-life balance is a little bit easier for me now. And I think that's the reality, isn't it? You know, we go through these phases in our life, and it's about being able to manage each of those phases as they come along.
So you do get a chance to ride your bike occasionally?
100%. I try and do some sort of physical activity every single day. Like I was saying before, I really think it's super important. This morning I got up, you know, I'm living in Edge Hill at the moment, did a lap of the Red Arrow. You know, we are spoiled in Cairns, you know, as you both
absolutely
know.
Coffee at Bellies, at Rusty's, you know, life's good.
Absolutely.
Hey, you know, you've made You inspire me. I love to do this. This is just such a privilege to talk to you. We all have a story, human story, and I get quite emotional on that. But one thing that's really touched me with what you've said, and that's so relevant to now, and I think it goes with your coaching and counseling experience and what you're wanting to do, I can see in the future. And that is the world has changed. I think you said back in 2002, you moved to Cairns. Is that right? You moved
2001, yeah.
2001. So back then, you look how fast our technology's moved now. And you said you had a mobile phone back then. You say the pressures back then. And if we fast forward to this where we stand right now, and I can say personally, I'm sitting here with two mobile phones. One is a work phone and one is a personal phone. And the personal phone has two lines running through it. So I've got three phones really on me right now. And they're all on silent. But I know they're there. And that's the thing, it's the balance that we have to look after ourselves so we can look after others in our team, and not just at work, but also at home. And I think with the direction you're headed in, it's become, and these discussions have become more relevant to helping other humans look after themselves, because ultimately if we're not looking after ourselves, we can't do anything, can we?
No.
And you know that yourself, because we all have a story, we all have our own human story, and that probably could take you into many directions with this conversation. But I think the fastness and the speed that we're living now with these things called mobile phones that can cause great anxiety within us individually.
I think probably that take on that is because you can have a situation in your life where you don't let go of work. If you take that mobile phone home and you've got to go out for dinner, it's there. So how do you let go, as it were, when you're on call and when you work shifts and when you've got to be at the answering questions on the hop all the time? So for workers on frontline and workers in forensics who, as you say, see some pretty horrific things, how do you encourage them in the separation point, letting go and realizing that it's not their life, they're just in it in the workplace? It's step in and step out.
It's a good question, Claire, and I guess that's what motivated the whole aspect around my evolution. So over the trajectory of my career, I've always had this view that I wanted to be the best version of myself. And I know that language gets used a fair bit today, but that's the reality. I wanted to show up as the best person I could in the life of the people that were important to me. And early on, 2002 to 2005, I had 3 kids. So I was balancing that on-call aspect with young children. And then as they get older as well, I really, that's my why. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is being the best version of me for them. So it's answering that question that is the thing that drives me. And I also, on the back of that, have a view, and I'm not saying that this is 100% right, but this is just how I look at it, that if I don't turn up as the best version of me, then I'm shortchanging the people in my life. Now, whether that's my kids, whether that's, if I have a partner, that's my partner, the people that I work with, I'm not giving them the best version of me. So the onus is really on me to do that. And that's what drove this, was my exploration around how do I, and I use the language, stay above the line. How do I stay above the line and be in optimal health? Because if I'm not in optimal health, then I'm not the best version of me. And many times in my career and my personal life, I reckon I've been holding on to that line by one finger, but I've always been driven to find what are the things that other people are doing that are traveling well? What are they doing? Because maybe I can experiment with that and try that and see if that forms into a habit that helps me to be in optimal health. And that's, in a nutshell, that's really what's driven me. So in answer to your question, I really think it's about one, having that desire to be as healthy as you can possibly be. And I use whether that's brain health and physical health. I don't think you can have one without the other. So finding that, and then just working on a strategy that works for you. But, if you're on call and you're in the middle of doing something and you're out with your family for dinner, that's a terribly hard thing to do, to switch off. It's, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but to get back into that. And we've all been there. It doesn't matter what you do. Like you've got something happening away from the person that you're connecting with. then, you know, it's very easy for our mind to slip away to that other issue and not be connected. And that's something that I think, you know, as you said before, and we have so many distractions, I think.
Absolutely.
We do. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it shows too, you know, in just with public transport, we've got trains now that are the quiet trains. And because, you know, years ago, you know, you get on a train, called a little red rattler from Geelong to Melbourne. And as a child, we used to be on there, and mum would have the age sprawled out, you know, and I'd be jumping around on top of it. That was me, I had a bit of energy. But the thing is, people were reading and, you know, and having, you know, conversations face to face. And now, though, even on public transport, you know, people are on phones. And, you know, the thing is that we hear overshared conversations. You know, you're sitting next to someone on a train or wherever, and you've just heard like something, you go, and I was like, because our world is, I've got to say, it's really weird. Like, who would have thought, you know, like who would think that, you know, we could send a picture and not even in a second across the world on a mobile phone, you know. So I think that the technology's got so fast, but the human balance of the technology hasn't kept up. So we haven't designed habits, like we talked about habits, and, you know, being in your profession, Don, and sharing with the listeners. I mean, you've obviously formed some crucial habits to help you exist as a human for you, and then also for your family, for your children, and for the ones that you love, you know, your friends and whoever else is in your life. But if you could tell our listeners, you know, some of those habits that you've formed that could help them potentially on a daily level, then just, you know, if they take one, if you share a few, they might take one of them and it could change their life, you know, because I know that's your deep passion point, we like to call it. And Claire and I talk about this a lot, you know, what's your passion point? What you know, when our time comes up on this planet, you know, and I think this is really important conversation, you know, what do you want me to say about you, or you say about me? What will make me feel happy to know that I've shared with you that helped you as a human, your human experience? So what would you share?
I think what I would want someone to say, I would hope, you know, when I pass on, is that, you know, he was a good person and he helped as many people as he could. You know, I think that's what it's about. I think for me, life's about, you know, learning, taking on new ideas, manipulating those ideas into habits at work, and then sharing those ideas with other people from a principle perspective, because we all have different methods. You know, we talk about exercise. There's a myriad of ways we can exercise, but moving our body is the principle. So pick one that works for you. But essentially what I found, it was about over a 15-year period where I really just started digging in to try and find what were those strategies that people were using when they were traveling at their best. And I just would consume everything I possibly could, mainly around podcasts and listening to audiobooks. And I found there were 7 key areas that floated to the top. And then what happened was, when I started doing the workshops, I would ask people what they think they needed for optimal brain health, and they would say the same things. And then, last year I did a bit of some research around it, and the research points to the same thing. So there's 7 key areas that I'll share with you, but the reality is that we know these things. You know, we don't need someone to tell us. We already intrinsically know these things. So the first one is around our beliefs and the lens in which we view the world. And on the back of that, the stories that we tell ourselves, because I believe that every aspect of our life, we tell ourselves a story. You know, our partner, we tell ourselves why it's a good relationship, why we like our partner. Our job, we tell ourselves a story around that. So what are those stories? That's the belief aspect. The second one's around exercise and moving our body, and just choosing a way that you do it, but do it every day. We were never meant to be sedentary from an ancestral perspective. Our diet and the food we eat, so understanding that, and understanding that there's a million different diets out there, but the reality is, from a principle perspective, when you eat a fat, a carbohydrate, and a protein, our body reacts to that in a particular way. Understand that, and then apply that how you wish. The next area is around sleep. You know, we need to have that sleep and that good solid rest. And from an ancestral perspective, there was an aspect, whether you call it a siesta or some non-sleep deep rest or meditation or whatever it is, but from an ancestral perspective, we slept from the time the sun went down to the time the sun come up.
Yeah.
But then there was also a period where we would rest during the day as well. So how does that work for you? Managing stress in this modern world is super important, because as you know, stress can be really, really good for us, or it can be the worst thing ever. And it all comes down to our perception of it. And if you look at, like an animal in nature that gets chased, like a gazelle gets chased by a lion, 1 minute it's sitting there eating its food, calm as you like. Next minute it's 100 miles an hour to escape. And then as soon as the lion's gone, it's back to eating its food. So, again, there's some lessons we can take from that about how we do that. The next one's around learning. There's this idea that we have somewhere between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. And that when we get to our mid-30s, we become reflexive and habitual in our thinking, and we have the same thoughts each day. Well, if that is true, then I believe that if we're learning something new every day, we can't possibly have those same reflexive thoughts, because we're continuing to go off on different paths and explore different things. And the last one is around community and connection. We're herd animals. That's how we've evolved, and we need that community and that connection. And we all know how amazing that feels for us. So they're the 7 key things that I think are just super important. And I just live my life by that every day. And I share those ideas with anyone who'll listen.
We're listening.
Yeah. and everything you just said then, it's a great reminder. And that's why these conversations are so important, because I'm sure that there's people listening out there that have got all sorts of things going on in their lives. And like you were saying before, you're on that line, and that line when probably sometimes things happen in our life and all of a sudden we become reactive really quickly. But when we're looking after our health and those 7 key elements that you just have discussed, when we're even grasping, 4 of those and drive towards the 7, that reactive self individually becomes less reactive, because we're healthier. And so it's, as the saying goes, healthy body, healthy mind, it's all connected. We've got all these sayings that, our parents have said, or our grandparents have said over the years. But someone said to me the other day, there's no such thing as a free lunch, Anna. And I'm like, and I'm like, oh, my Nana said that to me when I was like 5. I was always hungry, just saying. So, it's interesting, and I think those little, again, they're all habits. You talked about habits and how we go about that. But for me, hearing everything you've said, I'm sure that there's been times where you can reflect on when you realize that those 7 key elements were even more important to you individually for your health. Could you sort of maybe, is there something that comes to mind that, your health changed, or, there was where you went, oh yeah, I've really got to do this even more so now? Like, because we get to an age, I'm 45, I feel like I'm going in another direction. Like every I don't know, I call them every 5 years is a different story to tell in that 5 years. I set goals within 5-year brackets. So is there something that comes to mind where that those 7 things that I can hear you're super passionate about, they became even more important to tell and to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. 27th of November last year, I was traveling superbly. Like I felt super healthy. Life was good. I just spent 6 weeks traveling around, sharing these ideas in different training events, and was having a ton of fun. And I got back to the room at the hotel in Townsville, and my mouth was a little bit sore, and my throat, and not unusual. When you're talking all day, you get a bit fatigued. The next morning, I woke up, and down both sides of my mouth, it was just so sensitive. I couldn't eat bacon and eggs for brekkie. It was hurting that much. By that afternoon, my whole mouth had just erupted into these horrendous ulcers. And initially, the diagnosis was hand, foot, and mouth, adult hand, foot, and mouth. But I had that from the 27th of November through to the 8th of January. On the 8th of January, I was admitted to hospital because in addition to these ulcers, it just never went away. They just moved around in different parts of my mouth, but I essentially couldn't eat solid food for that period. And then I got these wicked lesions on my legs, and they put me in hospital. When I got into the Cairns base, and I got to tip my hat to all the medical staff. They're just, it's interesting, isn't it? When you're not in that environment, you don't fully appreciate it. When you get in and see what an amazing job these people do in these different spheres, it's incredible. But I bounced around in the Cairns base for a week, And then one day they had no idea what was wrong with me still. They were just running all these tests. They came in one day and they said, we want to do a bone marrow biopsy. And I went, really? What is that necessary? Thinking they were going to drill a hole in my femur and suck out some bone marrow. Well, it turns out they don't. They punch a hole in the back of your pelvis and they suck it out through there. And they came back that afternoon and said, we're really sorry, but you've got lymphoma. And I was like, okay, what's that? I said, it's a blood cancer. So I had a month in, and okay, so in answer to your question, Anna, this is what happened. I had my own little pity party there for a while. This is crap. This sucks. Why me? I'm trying to do all these things to be as healthy as I possibly can. And the realization came to me pretty quickly that you know what you need to do here. You already know these strategies that are going to get you back to being in optimal health. And after I got over my little pity party, I spent a month in hospital, first round of chemo in hospital, 5 chemos out of hospital. I lost 16 kilos. So I went from 80 kilos before I went into hospital. I came out as a 64 kilo anemic stick of a person. People that known me all my life or for last 30 years walk past me, wouldn't even recognize me. But I just made it my goal to my plan was to employ these ideas every single day as diligently as I could to get back to optimal health as quickly as I could. And it worked. It took me 4 months and 1 week from the day I got out of hospital. And yeah, I just treated it like my job. And it was, to a large extent, I was very fortunate that I was able to use paid sick leave, and I would just get up every day and just execute those things. So yeah, good test.
And I'm hearing that, that heart feeling of that time. And I remember, we talk about technology. I remember reading the post, and we talk about our own human experiences and discussions. And again, it was like, man, I'm not putting up a post. I'm ringing this guy. And I'm sure you can remember, I just rang you straight up and I was like, absolutely, I don't know what I can do. I just wanted you to hear a voice, because it must have been so hard for you at that time. Yeah. And you had the tools. And this is the thing, Don, and that's why I know you're so passionate, because you had the tools. You had such an incredible upbringing with, such strength with, doing physical movement, and, all those muscles were, it all goes back to our childhood. You rode a bike, you went fishing, you did all those things. So you were an active child. So all those good practices, it all goes back. We're trying to heal as adults, but really the conversation is, what's happening with the children now. So you having, this incredible coaching and consulting business with you're not just reading it from a textbook. You've got a human experience to tell, so people can relate to that. And I just have to say that, I don't know, Claire would agree, we're just so lucky to have you here today with us. So that, you're meant to be here, and if that's your sole purpose to share that, it just is more power to you. No, we're backing you, mate. You were the first person I wanted to write down on my list. I'm clicking my pen, by the way. I better stop doing that. I'm a fiddler.
So, Don, I just wanted to round that off, because this ties into something that I really follow and believe in my life and in the situation that I'm in currently. But it's the expression, life happens for us, not to us. And do you reflect on that illness and feel like it was something that was really important in your life and it gave you a change of direction? Or do you reflect on it and actually almost feel grateful that it happened because it did something for the pace that you were working at? Or how do you reflect on that while we wind this down a little bit?
Yeah, and what did it invoke in you? Because it can invoke, kind of like, is that the word, invoke? Yeah.
Well, I feel that before I got crook, that I worked super hard at having an awesome attitude, what I feel is an awesome attitude to life, where, you embrace all these things anyway. What it did was just underscore those things. Like, if you can't eat for 3 months, then your appreciation of food and drink becomes so much heightened, So I had
ventilating at the floor. I love to eat and cook.
So I have a mouthful of food now, and I try and savor it, or I have a beer and it's like, oh, that is delicious. So there was
Yeah.
definitely that aspect of it. And just, like I said, I always knew that life was fragile from that early experience as a kid, but then through the cops, gee, you see some, as you can imagine, you see how centimeters, determine whether people live or die. So it just underscored everything for me, Claire, to really just embrace every day. And that's what I've definitely done even more since having that experience. So, yeah.
So can I ask?
Yeah.
If we had to have one moment of what next?
What's next?
So what haven't you told us?
Yeah, so this is my passion. That my aim is to just do this on a continual basis. Just share these ideas. We're just this Monday just gone, we're running a program with Dr. Susan Swanson from the Plaza Medical Center. She's an expert in low carb nutrition. So we're running 2 programs simultaneous: the High Performance People program, which essentially unpacks those 7 concepts we spoke about, and then helps people through embedding those habits into their daily practice. At the same time, Susan's doing her low carb nutrition transition. So that is super exciting. And look, that's for me, that's the future. That's where I want to spend more of my time in investing. And just before we started chatting this morning, we've got a messenger group. People are really getting, they're seeing the benefits and they're feeling it already. And we're in the first 4 or 5 days of the program. So, that's what moves the needle for me. Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So that'll be my focus.
So to wrap it up, because you know what,
we could talk all day.
We're going to have you back. You're going to have a segment. Just to wrap it up today, like, I'd really love you to let the listeners know where they can actually touch base with you. We've got so much technology now. Would you like to share that with us? Like how we'll have it on our website, but if you could just tell them now.
Yeah, sure. Probably the easiest way is just through myevolution.com.au, the website. There's the contact points, email and phone on there. Or if people want to follow me on Facebook under My Evolution, one word, on Facebook. And I just try and post all the good info that I can find on there. I've got a couple other pages, but that's probably a nice place to start and connect, and we'll go from there.
Just one thing you have left out before we go, you actually are an author too. You kept that one secret.
Ooh.
I'm a what, sorry?
Author.
Yeah.
An author.
We have an author in the house.
Yeah. I had to sort of pitch that as well, my friend.
Yeah, no worries at all. Look, that was the story behind that is I started writing that book in 2004, finished it in 2008. So talk about procrastination.
No, you're not alone. I think the story of writing is very, very similar.
Yeah, but the reason I did it, essentially, it's time starts now. It's all about 10 strategies for happiness, and all it was me capturing what I believe was important at that point in time. The reason being is, unfortunately, when I came to Cairns in 2001, my boss had just passed away from a melanoma, which resulted in brain cancer, and he had a young child. And as I had my kids, I just wanted to write it as an insurance policy. If anything ever happened to me, at least they had some understanding as to what I thought was important at that time in my life. So that was the rationale behind it. It's a very easy and simple book to read, and one of those ones where you read back over it afterwards and it's a little bit cringy in some places. So there's a revised edition coming out, that's for sure.
Fabulous. Can't wait to read it.
So good. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah.
It was awesome speaking to you today.
And likewise, and can I just thank both you ladies, because what you're doing is sensational. This idea about sharing the human stories that we all have is super valuable. So I just want to say sincerely thank you to both of you for doing this, because there's a lot of work that goes into making this happen, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for saying. Okay, Don, we'll talk to you again, yeah?
Coffee.
Come back?
Love to. Sounds great.
Excellent.
Oh, wow.
Really interesting.
Wow.
Really interesting.
He had a ton of stuff to say, and every part of it was interesting. But what I kind of find really fascinating is this: as we mature, how our focus and how it becomes something that the common thread that we see through is health.
We all just keep going back to that, don't we?
Everyone.
It's fascinating because no matter what we do, what kind of work we do, where we sit in the structure of life, if we would like to call it, other, like, we have, I don't know, like there's people of all different sections of community, if that makes sense, that do different things. But the same conversation happens with us all, and we all go back to it. Because you know what? If your health suffers, everything else suffers. And the people around you also feel that suffering for you. So as a survivor of cancer, and Don being so open with us has made me appreciate my good health and fortune in that area. We've all had stuff happen to each other.
Good health is well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the vehicle. So if your body can't move, if it can't take you anywhere, it's not impossible to live, but it becomes such a different hindrance to your lifestyle. So staying well and healthy as best as possible, given the circumstances you might have.
Yes.
That's definitely what we take home from that.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And I think too, with all of Don's life experiences in the Queensland Police Force and educating people within his role, now taking it into another space of education with health and different tools that he's learnt and that have helped him physically, I think was a big take for me.
He's a true educator.
Absolutely. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Our Human Experience. You can follow us on social media on Instagram and Facebook.
ourhumanexperience.com.au.
Listen to Our Human Experience, where you can pod binge anytime you like. See you next time.
Bye.
If you have found this episode to cause you some distress, please reach out to a friend or call Lifeline anytime on 131114. 131114. Take care.